Toejam and Earl was a top-down roguelike with a two-player co-op mode about two very 90s aliens who crash land on Earth and have to find replacement ship parts. The sequel is a completely different type of game, a rare 2D example of the collectathon platformer genre, retaining only the protagonists and the two-player co-op mode, which is optional. The plot is that the aliens must capture a bunch of humans who stowed away on their ship at the end of the first game. You throw bottles at the enemies, which thankfully you have infinite ammunition for, and after hitting them a certain number of times, they get captured inside the bottles, which you must grab before they escape, kind of like in Bubble Bobble. Your character locks onto enemies to an extent with their attacks, but there's sadly no way to choose which enemy you're targeting if there's multiple on screen. Once every enemy in one of the game's 18 levels is captured, you can reach the ending of the level and move on to the next. It's a long game that is unlikely to be finished in one setting, unlike most Mega Drive games, so you'll probably need to use the password you're given at the end of every level, especially if you're playing on original hardware without save states. Enemies often hide in trees or bushes. Pushing up next to one of these lets you check to see if there's an enemy there. You might also find an item, or a trap, which you must quickly move to the side to avoid. There is a scanner at the bottom of the screen telling you where the nearest enemy is, so finding every enemy, which might sound like an insurmountable challenge, is not that hard. The levels are split into multiple screens. They're quite large levels. It's best to clear one screen at a time of all of its enemies before moving on to the next. You can teleport a short distance to avoid enemies or to phase through walls, but there is a limited ammunition for this teleportability, which encourages you to explore for secret ammo in secret areas and optional challenges. You can talk to aliens throughout the game, which gives it a bit of an atmosphere, and also gives you tips on where to find secret areas and challenges, and there's a lot of these secret places. There are also cutscenes at the start and end of the game, which wasn't a guarantee at this period, giving it more story than most of the era, though it's still a minimal story. The various animations the protagonists have, such as idle animations, also give it quite a cartoony feel. Pausing the game lets you use three special abilities: a scanner, which uses the same ammunition as the teleportability, which tells you what's hiding in bushes, so it's not just luck. And there are also two other special abilities with their own type of limited ammunition. Sadly, it's so limited, I only got 5 pieces of ammo for it by the end of the game, and so I never used those. So I don't know what they even do. Even if you run out of ammo for the teleporter or scanner, everything that isn't a secret area can be reached without the teleporter. However, it's usually by a much more long-winded route, or a more difficult route to get there. And you will miss out on some secret areas if you can't teleport. You can find special jars, that is, the jars you throw at the enemies, which kill enemies in one hit, which is very nice, but sadly, you have to use that jar the next time you attack. You can't store it for a hard enemy. There's a nice variety of minigames. Like a Simon Says game, you play with aliens to dance for them in front of a boombox, or a little score you get when you're jumping on trampolines, if you do tricks, and there's an infinite runner game, which you enter whenever you hit a magic door. Coins can be collected, usually from secret areas, which allow you to access more secret areas if you use them in vending machines. And hopefully these won't just give you more coins, they will hopefully give you some ammunition or health. Being a platform, you can obviously jump. Maybe it was in the manual, but no one in the game explains this, and it's necessary to reach some higher ledges. If you hold down before jumping, you jump slightly higher. The game's main flaw is that it does not respect your time in the slightest. Often you will have to climb up very large cliffs, jumping through dozens of platforms, using trampolines and bubbles to get higher, and if you fall down, you start all the way from the bottom and have to climb again and again every time you fall. This is especially annoying in snow levels where you slip around and can slip off ledges due to the ice. There are some awkward challenges like the aforementioned bubbles and trampolines. With the bubbles, you slide to the left and the right as you're standing on them, and you have to push in the opposite direction to avoid falling off, and these bubbles move extremely slowly. There are also trampolines. You have to press jump as soon as you land on the trampoline to move a little bit higher each time, and often you have to do this 6 or 7 times to get high enough to get where you want. And equally often, you have to not press anything and bounce and bounce and bounce until you stop bouncing to walk on top of the trampoline, both of which take way too long. There are doors and buttons that teleport you around. Sometimes they'll give you a secret area or let you get a shortcut, but often they'll teleport you back to an earlier part of the level, meaning you have to climb up again. And you're punished basically by having bad luck if you push the wrong button or open the wrong door. And the little doors that trigger the Infinite Runner minigame, those you can accidentally hit, and it takes about a minute to cancel the minigame by failing as soon as possible if you accidentally trigger it. You have to kill every single enemy in the level to complete the level, and there are just way too many enemies. It becomes quite a chore to collect them all. The enemy hunting radar is very good at helping you find enemies, but if you miss any, you're going to have to trudge back, often down a cliff, and then you're going to have to climb that cliff again, which could take several minutes. There's a nice variety of enemies in the game, which need to be tackled in very different ways. For example, there's construction workers who make the floor around them damaging and also stun you if you're standing on the floor, so you have to jump in the air and drop attacks on their heads from the sky to catch them. There are also women who just don't hurt you at all, but if you kill them, a bunch of dogs will jump out from bushes and attack you all at once. So it's best to check the bush, get the enemy dog jump out, and tackle the dogs one by one, and then attack the woman. But if you accidentally attack her while trying to do this, you'll trigger them all spamming you at once. There are invisible enemies who suddenly become visible just as they attack you, and you have to wait for that to happen before you can bash them, so it's a nice variety of enemies. Pushing down while fighting some enemies will trigger a defensive move, like diving to the floor or covering your eyes to avoid the flash of an enemy's camera, but you're only going to trigger one of these, so if you have an enemy you need to dive to avoid and an enemy you need to cover your eyes to avoid on screen at once, that can be a problem. Sometimes when there's multiple enemies, you have these kinds of contradictory strategies for dealing with them, even without the defensive move. For example, it's best to jump over dogs which are attacking you, because they're really fast and zoom back and forward, so jumping in the air and dropping attacks on them is the best way to attack them, but you can't use your defensive move while doing that. So if you have a cameraman who fills the screen with a flash of attack that you have to use a defensive move to avoid, you can't really, and you've got dogs attacking you, you can't really defend against both of them. Many enemies need to be hit way too many times to kill them, which is especially annoying if the enemy can only be hit at certain times. There are flying carpets that zoom across the screen to attack you. You have to wait about 5 or 6 seconds for each zoom, and it's hard to predict exactly when they're going to start zooming, so you'll often miss them, and often they'll come in from a direction you're not expecting, so you're going to have to dive to the ground to avoid them. So they can take forever to kill, even if you're hitting them every time, because they take 5 or 6 hits to get rid of. There are also nudists who hide in a little cardboard box and jump out and pelt you with tomatoes. This is a very absurdist game, by the way. And you can only hit them when they're jumping out of the box, but they can hit you when they walk into you with the box. You have to keep jumping over them until they finally decide to come out, and then you can attack them. And then they'll drop back into the box, and they take about 6 or 7 hits too. So you have to spend forever attacking them. There are too many enemies that have attacks that stun you for a while. Like, there are fairies that drop powder on you that stuns you for ages. There's ghost cows that possess you, doing damage after stunning you. And other enemies can gang up on you and stun lock you while you're stunned. Even enemies without a special stun attack can stun lock you because your invincibility period is just way too short. The dogs can do like 3 or 4 attacks before you can really do anything. Also, enemies knock you back way too far when they hit you, which means they can push you off ledges. Although health items are common, your health bar depletes far too quickly. Like, those dogs take about a quarter of your health bar or offer a fifth of it. So not many hits can just kill you, and they can hit you really quickly as you have a very short invincibility period, as I said. I feel like I have to jump in the air and drop attacks on the heads of enemies from above far too often. It feels like I'm cheesing the game when I do this. I said I need to do it with dogs, but there's lots of enemies I feel like that's the only way to attack them without getting destroyed. But of course you can't do that with enemies who are flying above you. Some enemies, like the cameraman I've mentioned, have these screen-filling attacks, and they can attack you through walls. So sometimes, and they'll often use the attack as soon as they appear on the screen. So you might not even notice them because they're at a lower level of the screen that you're not even on, but they can still attack you from there as soon as they appear on screen if you don't notice and immediately defend. And it can be hard to tell, for example, if you're on the same platform that, like, where there are construction worker enemies who will make the floor damage you. I've mentioned them before. But it can be hard to tell whether you are on the same floor as them. If there's a wall between you, sometimes that means you're not on the same platform, and sometimes you are on the same platform. So that can be a bit of an issue. The songs on the soundtrack are pretty nice. I mean, the game has a funk theme, so with that musical theme, it's good that the songs are nice, but unfortunately, there really aren't that many songs for such a long game. You're going to be hearing the same things over and over again, and this lack of variety is a plague on the game. There aren't that much variety of level themes. You'll get a snow level, a normal level, and that's about it. The variety of enemies stops increasing about halfway through, even though there are a lot of enemies. They're all introduced relatively early, and by about the halfway point, you've seen everything the game's going to throw at you. As I've said, the atmosphere is extremely fun. It does seem to outstay its welcome a bit, though, this game. If the game respected your time more, it would be a much better title. However, it's still quite fun. Perhaps if I played the 2-player co-op mode, it would have been even better, but I somehow doubt it, as the issues I've raised wouldn't be fixed by having another player around. Perhaps it could help with the combat, but it's not going to help you deal with these time-wasting platforming puzzles. Despite the game's flaws, as I've said, it's very good, especially if you're playing on an emulator and you can use save states to circumvent these time-wasting issues. Including the passwords, which are really long. If you've ever had to input a password on a Mega Drive game, you are glad you don't have to do that anymore. So, that's my surprisingly positive review of this. I know I've been complaining throughout, but it is a fairly fun game if you either have as much time as a little kid and you can endure the time wasting, or you have save states and can circumvent it.